I know I'm just an old guy spinning tales, but some tales aren't meant to be ignored. Trust me, you'll want to hear this one. So turn down the lights, settle in, and let's dive into today's chilling stories. Before we begin, a fair warning. What you're about to hear is purely for entertainment. These stories and theories, they're nothing more than shadows in the dark. No proof, just whispers carried by the night. Listen closely, but don't say, "I didn't warn you." Viewer discretion is strongly advised. I never should have let Cassie talk us into it. It started as one of those late-night conversations where you're half serious but bored enough to do something dumb. We were at her place, sprawled across her living room, the glow of her laptop, the only light in the room. "Have you guys heard of the elevator game?" she asked, scrolling through some paranormal forum. Tyler snorted. "Oh, great. Another internet challenge. What happens? We summon Bloody Mary in an elevator?" Cassie leaned forward, her face lit up like she'd found treasure. "No, it's way creepier than that. Supposedly, if you do it right, you can cross into another dimension." That got our attention. Cassie had a way of making even the weirdest things sound interesting. "What kind of dimension?" I asked, though I could already feel my stomach tightening. I wasn't good with creepy stuff, but I also didn't want to be the killjoy. She shrugged. "No one knows. The people who've done it say it's similar to our world, but wrong. Like the sky is red, and there are no people, except for her." "Her?" Lucas, the quiet one, finally looked up from his phone. Cassie grinned, clearly loving the suspense. "A woman. If she gets on the elevator, you're not supposed to look at her or talk to her. If you do, she'll..." She trailed off, letting the silence hang in the air. "She'll what?" Tyler asked, rolling his eyes. "Kill us? Drag us to hell?" "I don't know," Cassie admitted. "But people who break the rules disappear." I should have shut it down right there. But Cassie had this way of getting under your skin, like she knew you didn't want to be the one who chickened out. "Come on," she said, pulling up the rules. "It's simple. We just find a building with 10 floors and follow the steps. What's the worst that could happen?" "Getting arrested for trespassing?" Lucas muttered. But Cassie ignored him. I hesitated. The whole thing felt wrong, but Cassie was looking at me, waiting. Tyler was already in, and Lucas would follow wherever we went, even if he complained the whole time. "Fine," I said, against my better judgment. "But if we get caught, I'm blaming you." Cassie grinned, and just like that, we were in. We found the building a few blocks away, an old office tower that had seen better days, its dimly lit lobby empty, except for a security desk that looked abandoned. "This is perfect," Cassie whispered, her voice buzzing with excitement. Lucas groaned. "Yeah, nothing bad ever happens in creepy old buildings." The elevator was tucked at the end of a hallway, its brass doors scratched and faded. Cassie pulled up the rules on her phone again, reading them aloud like some kind of ritual. "Start on the first floor. Press the buttons in this exact sequence. 4th, 2nd, 6th, 2nd, 10th. If anyone gets on, you have to start over. When you reach the 10th floor, don't leave unless the doors open to the other world." "And if the woman gets on?" Tyler asked, smirking. Cassie's grin faltered for just a second. "Don't look at her. Don't talk to her, no matter what." We all squeezed into the elevator, the air feeling heavier than it should have. Cassie hit the button for the 4th floor, and the elevator jerked to life. At first, everything was fine. just an old, slightly creaky ride. We laughed, joked about how ridiculous it was. But by the time we hit the 6th floor, something shifted. The elevator lights flickered once, and the faint hum of the machinery seemed louder, like it was echoing inside my head. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" Tyler asked, but his voice was quieter than usual. Cassie didn't answer. She was too focused, her finger hovering over the buttons, like she was scared to press the next one. Finally, she hit the button for the 2nd floor again, and we started moving. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the air felt colder now. The walls of the elevator seemed closer, almost like they were leaning in. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, muttering something about bad vibes, but none of us responded. When we reached the 10th floor, the elevator stopped. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, I thought the doors wouldn't open. Then, with a groan, they slid apart. Beyond the doors was a hallway. At first glance, it looked like any other office floor. Dimly lit, beige walls, a few scattered chairs. But something was wrong. There were no doors, no signs, no windows, just a long, empty corridor that stretched into the darkness. "Is this, it?" Lucas asked, his voice shaky. Cassie nodded, though she didn't look so confident anymore. "I think so." I didn't want to step out. My instincts were screaming at me to stay put, to press the button for the lobby and leave. But Cassie was already moving, her phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. Tyler followed, because of course he did, and Lucas muttered a curse before stepping out after them. I was the last to leave, glancing back at the elevator as the doors began to close. I don't know why, but something told me I shouldn't let them shut. I reached out to stop them, but they slammed shut with a loud clunk before I could. We were trapped. The silence was suffocating. Cassie stood ahead of us, her flashlight beam trembling slightly as she scanned the endless hallway. The air felt thick, almost electric, like we'd walked into a place that didn't want us there. "Are you sure this is it?" Tyler asked, his voice low and uncertain, a far cry from his usual bravado. His fingers twitched nervously at his sides. Cassie nodded, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "This has to be it," she said, her words clipped and shaky. "Look, it's just, empty. That's what they said would happen. It's fine." Fine? It wasn't fine. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go back, to press every button on that elevator until it brought us to safety. But the elevator was gone. The soft hum it had made earlier was replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against my ears. Lucas muttered something under his breath. His hands were jammed into his hoodie pockets, and he refused to look down the hallway. "We shouldn't have done this," he said, his voice barely audible. "This was a mistake." We walked forward. Cassie led the way, her steps careful and deliberate. The sound of our sneakers echoed unnaturally, as if the hallway stretched on forever. With every step, the air grew colder, biting at our skin. I rubbed my arms, trying to fight the chill, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was the feeling, the unmistakable sense that we weren't alone. Then, we heard it, faint at first, almost imperceptible. A soft click, click, click that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the corridor. Cassie froze, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly as her hands shook. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely escaping my lips. My chest tightened, each breath harder to take than the last. "Yeah," Tyler said, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" Cassie turned to us, her expression steely despite the quiver in her voice. It's nothing. Probably just the building settling or, I don't know, something stupid. But we all knew it wasn't. The sound grew louder. Click, click, click. Slow, deliberate, like high heels on concrete. It echoed around us, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Maybe we should go back," Lucas said, his voice rising with panic. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide. "We can call it quits. I'm done." "You can't go back," Cassie snapped, whipping around to face him. "That's the rule. If we try to leave now, it'll mess things up." "Mess what up?" Lucas shouted. "You don't even know what's going on. You're just guessing." "Will you both shut up?" Tyler hissed, his head whipping back and forth like he was trying to track the sound. "We need to figure out where that's coming from." But I wasn't listening to any of them. My eyes were fixed on the end of the hallway, where the darkness seemed thicker, more alive. That's when I saw her. She was standing just beyond the edge of Cassie's flashlight beam, half shrouded in shadow. A tall, impossibly thin figure, her face hidden beneath a curtain of long black hair. She wore a tattered dress that clung to her like damp fabric, the hem brushing the floor. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stood there, silent and still, her head tilted ever so slightly, as if watching us. "Do you see her?" I asked, my voice trembling. Cassie followed my gaze, her flashlight trembling as she lifted it higher. The beam cut through the darkness, landing squarely on the woman, only for her to vanish the second the light touched her. "Where did she go?" I gasped, stumbling backward. "What are you talking about?" Tyler asked, panic creeping into his voice. "There's no one there." "I saw her," I said, louder this time. "She was right there." Lucas grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Don't say that," he whispered, his eyes darting around the hallway. "Don't talk about her. It's part of the rules." The air grew colder still, and the click, click, click sound started again, closer this time. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "We need to go back," I said, gripping Cassie's arm. "Forget the rules. Forget everything. Let's just go back before—" Ding. The elevator. The sound came from behind us, soft and unassuming, like it had the first time we stepped in. Slowly, we all turned. The doors were open, and the light inside cast a faint glow into the corridor. But it wasn't empty. A figure stood in the elevator, her head bowed, her face hidden beneath dark, tangled hair. She was perfectly still, but her presence filled the space like a weight pressing down on our chests. Cassie gasped, her flashlight clattering to the floor as she stepped back. "Don't look at her," she whispered. "Don't speak to her. Is she real?" Tyler's voice cracked as his eyes flicked toward the figure. "Don't look at her!" Cassie screamed, but it was too late. The woman's head snapped up. Her face, oh God, her face. It wasn't a face at all. Where her eyes should have been, there were only hollow, dark pits, deep enough to swallow light. Her mouth stretched far too wide, jagged teeth glinting as though they'd been broken and sharpened. The skin on her cheeks cracked and pulled as she smiled, her head tilting unnaturally to one side. For a moment, none of us moved, none of us breathed, and then she stepped forward. The sound of her bare feet hitting the elevator floor, thud, 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 echoed like gunshots in the silent corridor. Each step sent shivers down my spine, and my legs turned to lead. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. "Don't look at her," Cassie hissed, her voice shaking. She grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. "Emma, look at me! Don't look at her!" But it was too late. Tyler's eyes were locked on the woman. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman stopped. Her head jerked sharply toward him, the sound like bones cracking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she grinned, wide and toothy, a smile that felt like a threat. "Tyler!" Cassie screamed. "Don't talk to her!" But he didn't, or couldn't, stop. His expression was frozen in a mix of terror and fascination. "What do you want?" he whispered. Her grin widened. The lights in the hallway flickered violently, plunging us into darkness for half a second. When they came back on, she was inches from Tyler, her face level with his. His scream ripped through the air as she grabbed his wrist, her bony fingers curling around his arm like talons. He tried to pull away, but she was impossibly strong. The sound of her nails digging into his flesh was sickening, like nails scraping against bone. "Run!" Cassie screamed, shoving me toward the hallway. Lucas was the first to move. He bolted toward the far end of the corridor, his footsteps pounding against the floor. Cassie grabbed my hand, dragging me along as Tyler's screams echoed behind us. I glanced back, unable to help myself. Tyler's face was pale, his mouth open in a silent scream as the woman pulled him into the elevator. The doors closed behind them with a soft ding, and then silence. "He's gone," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Shut up," Cassie snapped, her voice shaking. "We have to keep moving." "But where?" Lucas yelled, his voice full of panic. "There's nowhere to go." He was right. The hallway stretched endlessly, in both directions, the walls bare and unmarked. It was like we'd been dropped into a maze with no exit. Cassie stopped, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "Okay," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Okay, let's think. There has to be a way back. We just have to find another elevator, or..." Her words were cut off by a low, guttural growl. We froze. The sound wasn't human, deep and primal, like an animal stalking its prey. It echoed from somewhere behind us, sending chills down my spine. Slowly I turned, but the hallway was empty. "Do you hear that?" Lucas whispered. "Yes," Cassie hissed. "Now move!" We took off running, the growl growing louder with each step. The walls around us seemed to shift, bending and twisting as though the building itself were alive. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for me to stop, but I couldn't. Something was chasing us. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Its presence pressing down on me, its breath hot against the back of my neck. Then, out of nowhere, a door appeared. It was small and unassuming, a plain wooden door set into the wall to our left. Lucas reached it first, slamming into it with both hands. "It's locked!" he yelled, frantically jiggling the handle. "Let me try!" Cassie shouted, shoving him aside. She twisted the knob with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The growling was right behind us now. I could hear its heavy footsteps, feel the vibration as it moved closer. "Emma!" Cassie yelled. "The flashlight!" I fumbled with the phone in my pocket, pulling it out and shining the light toward the hallway. And that's when we saw it. The thing chasing us wasn't human. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with long, gangly limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was ashen and stretched tight over its skeletal frame, its face featureless except for 2 glowing yellow eyes. It stopped just outside the beam of the flashlight, tilting its head as though studying us. "What is that?" Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "Open the door!" I screamed, backing away. Cassie kicked the door in frustration, tears streaming down her face. "It won't open!" The creature stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "Stay back!" I yelled, waving the flashlight wildly. The light seemed to hurt it. It flinched, retreating slightly, but it didn't stop. "Keep it distracted," Cassie shouted, ramming her shoulder against the door. I focused the flashlight on its face, the beam shaking in my trembling hand. The creature hissed, a horrible sound that made my ears ring, and lunged forward. The creature lunged, its gangly limbs stretching toward us, fingers like claws slicing through the air. I screamed, stepping back so fast I tripped over my own feet, falling hard onto the cold floor. The flashlight flew from my hand, spinning wildly as it hit the ground. The beam landed on the creature's face, and it shrieked, a sound so inhuman and piercing that I clapped my hands over my ears. Its body twisted unnaturally, retreating slightly into the darkness, but it didn't stop. "Get up, Emma!" Cassie screamed, slamming her shoulder against the door again and again. "Lucas, help me with this." Lucas hesitated, his face pale and drenched in sweat, but he moved. Together, they threw themselves against the door as the creature recovered, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto me. "Emma, move!" Cassie's voice broke through the panic fog in my mind. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight just as the creature lunged again. I swung the beam toward its chest, and it recoiled, its body convulsing violently like the light was burning it. "It hates the light!" I yelled, waving the beam back and forth to keep it at bay. Cassie let out a triumphant cry as the door suddenly gave way, splintering under their combined force. "It's open! Emma, come on!" I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted toward the door, the flashlight shaking in my grip as I kept the beam trained on the creature. It shrieked again, clawing at the walls as it struggled to avoid the light, its long limbs flailing wildly. "Go! Go! Go!" Lucas yelled, practically shoving me through the doorway. Cassie slammed the door shut behind us, her chest heaving as she leaned against it. The growling and scratching from the other side was deafening, but the door held, for now. We found ourselves in another hallway, but this one was different. It was narrower, the walls lined with strange, flickering lights that didn't quite illuminate the space. The air was thick, almost humid, and carried a faint metallic smell. "Where are we?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Cassie didn't answer. She was staring at something on the wall, a set of numbers etched into the surface, glowing faintly. 10, 4, 2, she murmured, tracing the sequence with her finger. "It's the button sequence," Lucas said, his voice rising in panic. "The one from the game." "What does it mean?" Cassie shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe it's a way back. Maybe we're supposed to—" Her words were cut off by a loud bang as the door behind us shuddered. "They're coming!" Lucas shouted, his eyes wide with terror. Cassie turned to me, her expression deadly serious. "Emma, the flashlight. If it hates the light, maybe we can use it to slow it down. Shine it on the door." I nodded, my hands trembling as I aimed the beam at the door. The banging stopped for a moment, replaced by a guttural hiss that sent chills down my spine. "We need to move," Cassie said, grabbing Lucas by the arm. "There has to be another way out. Let's go." We ran again, the hallway stretching endlessly ahead of us. The flickering lights cast strange shadows on the walls, shapes that seemed to twist and writhe as we passed. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop. Then we heard it, the ding of an elevator. Cassie skidded to a stop, her eyes wide as she pointed to a set of elevator doors at the end of the hall. They looked identical to the ones we'd started with, the faint hum of the machinery sending a strange mix of hope and dread through me. "That's it," she said. "It has to be." But Lucas shook his head, his face pale. "What if it's not? What if it takes us somewhere worse?" Cassie ignored him, rushing to the panel and slamming her hand against the button. The door slid open, revealing an empty elevator car. "Get in!" she shouted. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. "Emma, come on!" Cassie screamed, her voice desperate. I stepped forward, and that's when I saw it, the creature. It was standing at the far end of the hallway, its yellow eyes glowing brighter now, its twisted body hunched as though preparing to pounce. "Cassie," I whispered, unable to take my eyes off it. She followed my gaze and froze, her face contorted in fear. "Get in the elevator, now!" We piled into the car, the door sliding shut just as the creature lunged. Its claws scraped against the metal, leaving deep gouges, but it didn't get through. Cassie slammed the button for the lobby, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely press it. The elevator jolted to life, descending faster than it should have. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the elevator and the pounding of our hearts. Then, the lights flickered. The elevator lights flickered violently, plunging us into moments of pitch-black darkness. Each flash of light felt shorter, more strained, until the bulb gave one last weak glow and shattered with a sharp pop. We were plunged into complete darkness. "Cassie," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What's happening?" "I don't know," she snapped, her breath ragged. Her hands fumbled against the buttons, pressing them randomly in desperation. "It's not stopping. Why isn't it stopping?" The elevator groaned, the sound deep and metallic, like the walls themselves were straining under an enormous weight. I clutched the flashlight, flicking it back on. The weak beam illuminated our terrified faces, but the rest of the elevator felt impossibly vast, like it had expanded beyond its metal confines. And then came the whisper. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, like the sound of wind brushing past your ear. "Why did you look?" My blood froze. I whipped the flashlight around, the beam bouncing off the walls, but there was nothing there. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Shut up, Emma," Lucas hissed. "Just shut up." The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Why did you look?" "Stop it," Cassie screamed, covering her ears. "Make it stop." The elevator jolted suddenly, throwing us all to the floor. My flashlight rolled out of my hand, spinning wildly as it lit up the small space. And that's when we saw it. The woman. She was standing in the corner of the elevator, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her black hair dripping like it was soaked in water. Her hollow eyes locked onto us, her jagged smile stretching wider and wider. Cassie scrambled back, pressing herself against the wall. "Don't look at her!" she shrieked. "Don't!" But Lucas couldn't help himself. His head turned slowly, as though something were forcing him, and the moment his eyes met hers, he froze. "Lucas!" I screamed, grabbing his arm and shaking him. "Don't look at her! Look at me!" He didn't respond. His body trembled violently, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then, with a sharp, sickening snap, his head twisted to the side and he collapsed to the floor. "No!" Cassie screamed, tears streaming down her face. The woman turned her gaze to me next. I felt her presence in my mind before I even met her eyes. A cold, suffocating weight pressed down on my chest, pulling me toward her. My vision blurred, the edges of the world fading into darkness. "Why did you come here?" her voice whispered in my head. It wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, overlapping and echoing like a chorus of the damned. I didn't mean to," I stammered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, let us go." Her smile widened, her jagged teeth glinting in the faint beam of the flashlight. "You wanted to play," she hissed. "Now you'll stay." Cassie screamed again, her hand darting toward the buttons. She slammed her palm against them, over and over, until the elevator lurched violently. The woman's smile faltered, just for a moment, and the elevator began to move. The lights flickered back on, and when I looked again, the woman was gone. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and Cassie grabbed my arm, pulling me out into the lobby. We stumbled onto the cold tile floor, gasping for air, our bodies trembling with fear. We didn't speak. We couldn't. The silence in the lobby was deafening, the hum of the elevator fading behind us. "Lucas," I whispered, my voice breaking. Cassie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He's gone," she said, her voice hollow. I wanted to argue, to scream, to run back and find him, but something stopped me. A cold, unshakable certainty that he wasn't coming back. We left the building that night and never spoke about what happened. Not to anyone. Cassie moved away a few weeks later, and I stopped answering her calls. I couldn't talk about it. But the story didn't end there. It started small, lights flickering in my apartment, strange whispers just as I was drifting off to sleep. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the trauma playing tricks on me. But then, I started seeing her, in the reflection of a window, at the end of a hallway, standing in the corner of my room, always watching, always waiting. She hasn't spoken to me yet, but I know she will. And when she does, I won't be able to look away.